The morning started quietly, as it usually did in the small settlement at the edge of the valley. People were going about their routines, children running to fetch water, merchants arranging goods on rough wooden tables, and a few farmers checking their fields for early signs of spring growth. The air smelled faintly of earth and wood smoke, a calm that gave everyone a sense of normalcy. But that quiet morning was about to be shattered in a way no one could have imagined. It began with a strange shadow falling over the valley. At first, people thought it was a cloud, moving unusually fast across the sun, but then the shadow grew larger, darker, and heavier. A low rumble, unlike any thunder they had ever heard, vibrated through the ground. Windows rattled, and even the most skeptical of villagers stopped what they were doing to look up. High above them, a creature unlike anything humans had ever seen descended slowly from the sky. It was massive, far larger than any creature they had ever imagined. Its scales shimmered like the night sky, dotted with tiny lights that pulsed softly like distant stars trapped in living armor. Its wings were so wide that when fully extended, they blocked the sunlight, casting a shadow over the entire village. Even from a distance, its eyes could be seen, glowing faintly with an intelligent and almost sorrowful light. But what drew the villagers' attention most was what the creature carried in its claws. Nestled carefully, almost tenderly, was a smaller being, weak and frail, its body trembling. The humans could see that it was struggling, barely moving, and its breaths were shallow. Mothers instinctively clutched their children, and men exchanged worried glances. No one dared move closer. There was a deep fear in the air, a fear of the unknown, of something so alien that their minds could not comprehend it. From the edge of the crowd, one human stepped forward. He was known in the village as a mechanic, someone who could fix almost anything, machines, tools, even stubborn pieces of metal that seemed beyond repair. But this was different. This was not a machine. It was a living, breathing creature, one that seemed to carry both beauty and sorrow in equal measure, yet he felt a pull, something deep inside that told him he could not turn away. He watched as the massive creature landed with surprising gentleness, lowering itself onto the soft earth at the edge of the village. The ground shook slightly under its weight, but there was no aggression in its movements. It was as if the dragon knew exactly how to place itself so that no harm would come to anyone nearby. Yet the presence of such a being was overwhelming. The mechanic could feel the fear of the villagers around him. He could hear the whispers. "It will destroy us. Stay back. We should run." But he did not move. Instead, he took a deep breath and stepped closer, slowly, deliberately, making sure to show he meant no harm. The dragon tilted its massive head, as if studying him, and then, in a movement that was both terrifying and beautiful, it lowered the smaller creature to the ground. The young one made a faint sound, almost a whimper, and the mechanic's heart tightened. He had seen sick and injured animals before, but nothing like this. Its body seemed fragile, yet there was a strange resilience in the way it tried to lift its head. The villagers remained frozen in place. Some had tears in their eyes. Others hid behind carts or walls, unwilling to face the unknown. The mechanic ignored them. He knelt down slowly, speaking in soft tones, trying to communicate calm without knowing if the creature could understand him. He gently reached out a hand, hovering just above the young one's trembling body, careful not to touch until he was certain it would not cause more pain. For several long minutes, there was silence. Only the faint rustling of leaves in the wind and the low hum of the dragon's body broke the stillness. Then the dragon made a sound, a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to come from its very bones. The sound was not threatening. It was desperate, pleading. The mechanic felt it in his chest, a strange, almost electric sensation, as if the dragon's emotion was being transferred to him directly. It became clear that the dragon was asking for help in the only way it could. It could not speak words humans would understand, but its eyes, its posture, and the trembling of the small creature it carried told a story of urgency. The young one needed immediate care. If the mechanic did not act, it would die. Fear and doubt tried to creep into his mind. This was no ordinary patient. He had never dealt with anything like this. Its body was different from any animal or human he had ever seen. A combination of scales, soft tissue, and perhaps something else entirely. Something alien, Every instinct screamed that approaching it was dangerous. Yet another instinct, stronger than fear, pushed him forward. Compassion, responsibility, curiosity. He made a choice. He would help, whatever it took. With careful, deliberate movements, he motioned for the villagers to give him space. Slowly, they began to step back, some whispering prayers, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The mechanic reached down, this time letting his hand make contact with the young one's body. It was warm but lighter than anything he had expected. Its breathing was shallow, and there was a faint glow beneath its skin that pulsed in rhythm with the dragon's low hum. He realized immediately that conventional methods would not work. This was beyond medicine, beyond any human knowledge, yet he could not simply walk away. He looked up at the dragon, whose gaze was fixed entirely on him, and in that gaze he found what he needed: trust. The dragon was giving him a chance, offering him the life of the young one in his hands. The responsibility was immense, but he felt ready, somehow, to face it. The dragon slowly backed away, giving him space but never leaving. Its wings remained partially spread, a silent signal that it would defend the young one if needed. The mechanic felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Every heartbeat seemed louder than usual, echoing in the quiet morning. He had no idea what the future held, but he knew this: he could not fail. He lifted the young creature gently, cradling it as one might hold a fragile piece of history. Its small limbs flailed weakly, and its glowing eyes flickered with pain and confusion. He whispered reassurances, not expecting it to understand the words, but hoping the tone alone would provide comfort. The dragon watched intently, making small, vibrating sounds that seemed almost like a sigh of relief. As he turned toward his workshop, he could feel the eyes of the villagers on him. Some looked skeptical, some fearful, and some, especially the children, looked with wide-eyed wonder. He did not look back. His focus was entirely on the fragile life in his hands, and the extraordinary being that had trusted him enough to bring it here. The mechanic knew this was only the beginning. What lay ahead was unknown, possibly dangerous, and certainly challenging. Yet there was a spark of hope in the air, a sense that something extraordinary was about to happen, something that would change not just him, but everyone who witnessed it. That morning, the small settlement learned a lesson in courage without even realizing it. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. The mechanic, holding a creature unlike anything the world had ever seen, embodied that lesson perfectly. As the dragon lifted into the sky once more, hovering above the village, it seemed to nod ever so slightly, acknowledging the choice he had made. Then, with a soft beat of its wings, it disappeared over the horizon, leaving the mechanic alone with the young creature, and the immense responsibility that had now fallen on his shoulders. He carried it into his workshop, shutting the door behind him. Outside, the villagers whispered among themselves, unsure if they had just witnessed a miracle or a nightmare. Inside, the mechanic felt a strange calm settle over him. This was the first step in a journey none of them could have imagined, and he was determined to see it through, no matter what it required. The morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating the small, fragile form in his hands. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel something beyond fear, hope. And in that hope, he sensed the promise of the unbelievable story that was just beginning to unfold. The mechanic carefully set the young creature down on a soft pile of blankets in the corner of his workshop. The little one lay there, barely moving, its chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. Its small eyes flickered open once in a while, revealing faint, glowing patterns that pulsed like tiny lanterns inside its body. The sight made the mechanic pause. He had never seen anything like it, so fragile yet so alive, and clearly capable of intelligence beyond his understanding. He took a deep breath, letting the quiet of the workshop settle around him. Normally, he worked on engines, repairing broken machines or twisted metal, but now he faced a task far more complicated. How do you care for a being whose very biology seemed to belong to another world? The thought was both frightening and exhilarating. He knew he had to act carefully, to think with both his mind and his heart. The dragon had made it clear that it trusted him, and the mechanic could feel that responsibility pressing down like a weight on his chest. Outside the workshop, the village remained tense. Some villagers peeked through cracks in the walls, curious but too afraid to approach. Rumors were already spreading. Strange stories of a creature from the sky, a glowing child and a human brave enough to touch it. He knew the young one needed nourishment and warmth. Its body was cold to the touch, almost like it had been without care for a long time. He fetched warm water, careful not to startle it, and gently dampened a cloth. Slowly, he wiped off the faint dust and debris that clung to its tiny scales. Every movement had to be delicate. Even a small mistake could cause pain or worse. As he worked, the young creature made soft sounds, almost like tiny musical notes. The mechanic tried to mimic the rhythm with his own voice, hoping to calm it. And surprisingly, the creature responded by relaxing slightly. Time passed slowly. The mechanic stayed by its side for hours, watching every twitch, every movement, every flicker of its glowing patterns. He realized it had injuries not visible at first glance. Bruises under the scales, small cracks in what seemed like bone, and signs of exhaustion that only someone paying close attention could notice. He had to improvise. His hands moved with precision as he applied gentle pressure to ease discomfort and wrapped the tiny limbs in soft cloth for support. Then came the moment he felt certain the creature could understand him. In some strange way, he began talking, telling it about simple things, how the morning sun looked, how the wind moved through the trees, even about the small village outside the walls. It did not respond with words, but it did something more profound. Its chest rose a little faster when he spoke kindly, and the soft glowing patterns in its eyes shifted in what seemed like recognition. The mechanic realized that even across the gap between worlds, communication was possible. As he worked, a thought struck him. If the dragon had brought this young one here, it must have believed that humans could help in ways it could not. That alone filled him with both awe and pressure. He had no instructions, no guidebooks, no experience with alien life forms. He had only his hands, his mind, and the willingness to try. By midday, he had managed to stabilize the young one's breathing, though it was still weak. He decided to prepare a special mixture of nutrients, blending ingredients he hoped would be gentle enough for its alien system, but strong enough to give it energy. He approached slowly, offering the mixture on a small tray. At first it recoiled slightly, unfamiliar with the act of eating in this way. He remained patient, whispering encouraging words, and eventually it took a small taste. The mechanic felt a wave of relief. This small victory was significant. If the young one could eat even a little, it meant it still had the will to survive. The dragon's decision to bring it here was not in vain. The mechanic allowed himself a quiet moment to breathe, but he did not let his guard down. Recovery would take time, and every action from this point on mattered. Hours turned into the afternoon. The mechanic observed the young one's behavior, taking notes in his mind, noticing patterns. Its breathing became steadier, the glow in its eyes brighter. Small movements of its limbs indicated strength returning, and then unexpectedly the creature did something remarkable. It reached out a tiny hand and touched the mechanic's finger. The sensation was electric yet gentle, as if it were acknowledging him, thanking him. He froze for a moment, understanding that trust had been established. Outside, the dragon hovered quietly, occasionally making low hums of what sounded like concern. It did not interfere but remained close enough that the mechanic knew it could act if something went wrong. There was an unspoken understanding between them. The dragon had given him the chance to care for its young, and in return, he had to honor that trust with every decision he made. By evening, the mechanic realized that he needed to rest, but he could not leave the young one alone. He set up a small area with blankets warmed by lanterns and stayed close, monitoring its breathing and glow. He even started talking softly again, recounting stories from the village, describing simple events, hoping to keep the creature calm and distracted. He wondered if, in its own way, the young one was learning about human life and emotions, just as he was learning about its alien nature. Sleep came in short bursts, always interrupted by the creature's soft sounds or slight movements. Each time it stirred, he was ready, gently adjusting blankets, checking for signs of discomfort, whispering reassurance. The night felt long, but in those hours something incredible happened. He could feel a connection forming, not just between him and the young one, but between him and the dragon itself. There was a silent bond of trust, mutual respect, and understanding. The mechanic reflected on what had brought them to this moment. Fear had gripped the village earlier that morning. The unknown had loomed like a shadow over their lives, yet here he was in a small, dimly lit workshop, bridging the gap between species and worlds, facing a challenge that would have seemed impossible to anyone else. He felt both humbled and honored. As dawn approached, the young one began to show small signs of improvement. Its breathing grew stronger and its limbs twitched with more energy. The glow in its eyes, once faint and flickering, pulsed with warmth and life. The mechanic smiled quietly to himself, knowing that the first major hurdle had been overcome. But he also knew the journey was far from over. He looked outside through the workshop window, expecting to see the dragon leave once its young one was stable. Instead, it hovered silently, watching, waiting, and perhaps judging each of his actions. The mechanic realized that the dragon had more to teach him than he had anticipated. There was wisdom in its presence, an unspoken lesson about patience, trust, and the care of life, no matter how alien it seemed. By mid-morning, villagers had gathered again outside, whispering about the events of the previous day. Some were fearful, others curious, and a few had a sense of wonder that grew with each passing moment. The mechanic did not leave his post. His focus remained on the young one, making sure it continued to stabilize, giving it every bit of attention and care it needed. He thought about how fragile life could be and how courage often came in quiet, unseen moments. There were no grand gestures or heroic battles in this workshop, only small acts of attention, patience, and care. And yet, in those small acts, he realized something far greater was being achieved. The young one was learning trust. The dragon was learning that humans could be allies, and he, the mechanic, was learning the profound impact of compassion and courage. By the end of the day, the young one was breathing steadily, even managing small movements on its own. The mechanic allowed himself a brief smile, knowing that while the creature was still weak, the foundation for recovery had been laid. He set up a safe place for it to rest, promising silently that he would be there for every step of its journey. As night fell, the dragon returned, circling above the workshop, its wings casting shadows across the village once more. But this time the villagers were not as afraid. There was a sense of awe in the air, a quiet understanding that something extraordinary was happening right in their midst. The mechanic stood by the young one, exhausted but determined. He whispered softly, not expecting a reply, "You're safe now. We'll get through this together." The small creature's glow pulsed softly in response, as if agreeing. And in that simple exchange, a bond had been formed, one that would carry them through the incredible, unbelievable events that lay ahead. The next morning, the mechanic woke with the same quiet determination that had carried him through the previous day. The young creature lay in the soft blankets, breathing more steadily now, though still weak. Its eyes flickered open, glowing faintly as if testing the world around it. The mechanic felt a pang of both relief and concern. Relief that it had survived the night, and concern because he knew the real challenge was only beginning. He studied the creature carefully, noticing details he hadn't before. Its limbs, though small, carried hints of strength, and the tiny claws at the tips of its fingers seemed delicate but capable. The scales on its body glimmered in shades he had never seen before, somewhere between deep blue and green, with sparks of gold that appeared as he moved closer. The creature's breathing, though steady, still required attention, and he realized he would need to learn quickly how to monitor its health without any human reference. The mechanic gathered a few simple tools from his workshop, the kind he used for delicate repairs on machines. He carefully approached the young one, gently checking each limb and joint. It seemed to respond to his touch not with words but with subtle movements that hinted at comfort and recognition. He paused, realizing that this creature had its own way of understanding him, and perhaps he could learn to understand it in return. Outside, the dragon hovered silently, its wings casting wide shadows across the workshop walls. It seemed to watch every move, patient yet alert, ready to intervene if anything went wrong. The mechanic felt the weight of its gaze, knowing that the dragon's trust was not something to take lightly. Every decision, every action mattered. He could not afford mistakes. For breakfast, he had prepared a special mixture, blending some soft foods with water, creating a paste that he hoped would be gentle enough for the young one's alien digestive system. He held it out carefully, watching as the creature sniffed and hesitated. The mechanic spoke softly, narrating each step, not expecting it to understand the words but hoping the tone would reassure it. After a few minutes, it began to eat, slowly at first, then with a little more confidence. The mechanic allowed himself a quiet smile. Eating was a good sign, a signal that the creature had the will to survive. But he knew that this was just the beginning. He would have to teach it how to move, how to gain strength, and perhaps even how to communicate in ways they both could understand. The thought filled him with both excitement and responsibility. As he worked, he began to notice more about the creature's behavior. It seemed to respond to sounds in unusual ways, reacting to even the softest tones. Its glowing eyes shifted with emotion, and the patterns on its scales changed slightly when it experienced discomfort or curiosity. The mechanic realized that this was a form of communication, subtle but meaningful, and he resolved to pay close attention. The dragon remained nearby, occasionally making low hums that seemed almost conversational. The mechanic couldn't understand the sounds fully, but he sensed their intent: warnings, reassurances, or perhaps questions. There was an intelligence in the dragon's presence that he had never encountered before. It was not just a guardian, it was a teacher, showing him that care extended beyond simple medical attention. By mid-morning, the young creature had begun to explore its surroundings cautiously. Its movements were slow, almost tentative, but each small step showed growing confidence. The mechanic stayed close, guiding its movements gently, supporting its weak limbs. Every time it succeeded in standing or taking a step, he allowed himself a quiet moment of pride. Small victories mattered here. They were signs of progress in a world where everything was unfamiliar. The mechanic also began experimenting with communication. He would tap lightly on different surfaces, producing subtle sounds, and observe the creature's reactions. He discovered that it seemed to recognize patterns, responding differently to each sound. It was not speech as humans knew it, but it was language in its own way. The realization thrilled him. If he could learn to communicate with it even just a little, it would make the process of care much easier. Lunch came, and the mechanic prepared a slightly more complex mixture, adding ingredients that would provide more energy. The creature approached hesitantly but eventually accepted the food. The dragon watched from above, tilting its head as if approving. For the first time, the mechanic felt a sense of teamwork, an unspoken collaboration between human, dragon, and young creature. Each had a role to play, and together they were navigating uncharted territory. As the afternoon sun rose high in the sky, the mechanic decided it was time to test the young one's mobility further. He gently encouraged it to stand on its own, supporting its weight at first. The creature wobbled, teetering back and forth, but did not give up. The mechanic spoke softly, narrating each movement, praising each small success. After several minutes, the young one managed to stand without support for a few seconds. The glow in its eyes brightened noticeably, and the dragon let out a low, resonant hum that sounded almost like a sigh of relief. The mechanic realized that trust and patience were essential. This was not just about tending to injuries. It was about nurturing confidence, helping the young creature believe in itself. Each small triumph built upon the last, and he understood that this approach would be crucial for the recovery process. Evening approached, and with it came a quiet moment of reflection. The mechanic sat beside the creature, allowing it to rest while he observed the dragon circling above. He thought about the journey that had brought them here, the shadow over the valley, the arrival of the dragon, and the fragile life in his hands. He realized that courage was not just about bold actions. It was about consistency, patience, and the willingness to care when no one else would. The night was calm, yet filled with a sense of anticipation. The young creature slept fitfully, its glowing eyes flickering even in rest. The mechanic stayed close, adjusting blankets, monitoring breathing, and whispering softly to reassure it. Each sound, each movement was a signal, a way to maintain the connection that was forming between them. The dragon remained outside, its presence a silent reminder of trust and responsibility. The mechanic could feel the weight of its gaze, but instead of fear, he felt a strange comfort. The dragon's trust was not given lightly, and the fact that it had chosen him spoke volumes. He understood that their relationship had shifted from mere observation to mutual reliance. As midnight approached, the mechanic reflected on the progress they had made. The creature had eaten, moved, and even interacted with him in small but meaningful ways. These milestones were extraordinary, given the fragility of its condition when it had first arrived. He knew that recovery would be a long process, but for the first time, he felt hopeful. He also considered the larger implications. The village outside had witnessed only a fraction of what had occurred, yet they were already talking about the events. Some were fearful, others curious, and a few began to see the potential for something remarkable. The mechanic understood that his actions could change perceptions, not just for himself but for the community as a whole. Throughout the night he remained vigilant. Every twitch, every flicker of light from the creature's body was monitored carefully. He knew that healing was as much about observation as it was about action. With each passing hour, he became more attuned to its needs, learning to interpret subtle signs that might have gone unnoticed by anyone else. By the time the first rays of morning crept through the workshop windows, the young creature had made significant progress. Its breathing was steady, its limbs were stronger, and its eyes glowed with a quiet confidence. The mechanic allowed himself a moment to smile, realizing that the bond they had formed was growing stronger by the hour. The dragon returned, hovering near the workshop with a sense of watchful pride. The mechanic felt a surge of gratitude. He had faced fear, uncertainty, and the unknown, yet he had persevered. The trust placed in him by both the dragon and the young creature was extraordinary, and he vowed silently to honor it every step of the way. With careful hands, he prepared the creature for another day of growth and learning. He knew that challenges still lay ahead. This was only the beginning, but he was ready. Together they had taken the first steps on a journey that would test courage, patience, and compassion in ways he could not yet imagine. The sun rose fully, casting warm light across the workshop, illuminating the young creature and the mechanic as they began a new day. Outside, the village watched silently, perhaps sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding in their midst. And within the quiet of the workshop, a bond was growing stronger, a bond between human dragon and young life, a bond that would carry them through the unbelievable events still to come. The next morning began quietly, but the mechanic could feel a sense of anticipation in the air. The young creature, though still small and fragile, had grown noticeably stronger. Its glowing eyes pulsed with a soft rhythm, brighter than the day before, and it moved with a little more confidence. The mechanic studied it carefully, noticing subtle changes in behavior, small shifts in posture, tiny movements of the limbs, and a faint rhythmic flutter of its chest. Each of these signs told him that recovery was progressing, and that trust between them was deepening. He began the day as he had the previous ones, preparing soft food and water to nourish the creature. This time it approached him more willingly, reaching out its small hands as if it understood that he was there to help, not to harm. He smiled quietly, realizing that the bond they were forming was something extraordinary, one built not on words, but on shared experience, patience, and trust. Outside, the dragon hovered above the workshop. Its presence had become a comforting part of the environment. It made no sudden movements, only circling slowly as if to keep watch. Occasionally it emitted a soft hum, resonating through the air, which seemed to calm the young creature even further. The mechanic had come to recognize these sounds as more than mere noise. They were the dragon's way of communicating, guiding, and observing. The morning passed with a sense of cautious progress. The mechanic encouraged the young creature to move, supporting it carefully as it took small steps across the workshop floor. Each time it faltered, he offered gentle reassurance, letting it know that failure was part of learning, that it was safe, and that he would be there to help. The creature began to respond, attempting to balance on its own and taking tiny hops forward. With each success, its glowing eyes brightened, and the dragon's low hum seemed almost like applause. At one point, the creature paused, looking at the mechanic as if to ask a question it could not voice. He knelt down to meet its gaze, and for a moment there was a shared understanding, a recognition that they were learning from each other. This was no longer simply about survival, it was about connection. He realized that the creature's strength was not just physical but emotional, that its trust in him was as important as any medicine or nourishment he could provide. The mechanic spent the afternoon experimenting with new ways to help the creature build strength. He created small obstacles, soft ramps and blocks so it could practice climbing, balancing, and jumping. Each attempt was met with encouragement and gentle guidance. The young creature struggled at first, often stumbling and falling, but each time it succeeded in overcoming an obstacle, its confidence grew. The dragon hovered nearby, wings extended, moving in harmony with each action as if silently cheering its young one on. As the day progressed, the mechanic noticed an extraordinary change. The creature's glow began to fluctuate in response to its own emotions. When it succeeded at a task or responded to his encouragement, the light pulsed warmly and brightly. When it struggled or became frightened, it dimmed and flickered. The mechanic realized that this was more than mere biology. It was a form of emotional expression, a way for the creature to communicate feelings beyond words. He felt a deep sense of awe. By evening, both mechanic and creature were exhausted yet fulfilled. The creature had taken multiple small steps on its own, explored parts of the workshop it had never seen, and even attempted to interact with simple objects. Its energy was returning in waves, and the mechanic could see the beginnings of what he would later call curiosity, the desire to explore, to learn, to engage with its surroundings. The dragon, sensing the progress, made a slow, deliberate landing outside the workshop. Its massive eyes watched intently, observing every detail. Then, in a gesture that surprised the mechanic, it lowered its head slightly and allowed a small glowing tendril from its wingtip to brush the young creature. The response was immediate. The creature's glow brightened like a beacon, and it made a small melodic sound of joy. The mechanic realized this was a moment of recognition, a form of approval from the dragon itself, confirming that his care was effective. Night came, and the mechanic continued his vigil. He prepared a light meal for the creature and ensured that the blankets and soft supports were in place. But this night was different. The creature began to attempt more complex movements, stretching its limbs, adjusting its posture, and even curling slightly, as if preparing to rest like a human child. Each motion was cautious but deliberate, signaling that its confidence in its own body was returning. The mechanic reflected on how much progress had been made in just a few days. When the dragon first arrived, clutching the frail, dying creature, he had been unsure if he could help. Now he saw that life was fighting back, aided by patience, guidance, and trust. He realized that care was not just about treatment, but about connection, learning the language of gestures, lights, and sounds. In this moment, he felt a deep gratitude for the opportunity to witness and nurture this extraordinary being. Outside, the dragon maintained its watch, but it did not hover as tensely as before. Its movements were slower, deliberate, and filled with an unmistakable calm. It seemed to understand that the mechanic had proven himself capable and reliable. This mutual respect had grown naturally, forged in moments of care, observation, and unwavering attention. As midnight approached, the young creature made a small, sudden movement that startled even the mechanic. It raised its tiny head and emitted a series of soft, rhythmic hums, sounds the mechanic had never heard before. He listened intently, recognizing patterns that seemed to convey emotion, curiosity, and even an attempt at communication. In that moment, he understood that progress had moved beyond physical recovery. The creature was learning, experimenting, and expressing itself in ways that transcended human language. The mechanic responded in kind, making gentle hums and vibrations with his own voice, testing to see if the young creature would respond. To his delight, it did. The glowing patterns in its eyes shifted rhythmically, in sync with his sounds. The dragon hovering above let out a low hum, adding its resonance to the exchange. For the first time, all three of them, human, dragon, and young creature, were communicating in a shared rhythm, a silent language of care, trust, and understanding. The night continued with this extraordinary exchange. The mechanic stayed close, guiding gently when needed, observing every nuance and responding with patience. Each sound, each gesture, each flicker of light was a step in building trust and connection. By the early hours of the morning, he realized something profound. The young creature was not just recovering physically. It was growing emotionally, socially, and intellectually, learning the dynamics of interaction in a completely new world. As dawn approached, the mechanic took a quiet moment to reflect. The journey had been intense, filled with fear, uncertainty, and responsibility, yet it had also been profoundly rewarding. He had learned that courage was not about confrontation or heroics, but about patience, observation, and unwavering attention to the needs of another being. And in return, he had witnessed a form of gratitude and trust that transcended species and worlds. When the first rays of sunlight entered the workshop, the young creature was awake, moving with more strength and awareness than ever before. Its glowing patterns pulsed gently, showing curiosity and engagement. The dragon, sensing the change, hovered closer, wings partially folded, its massive eyes reflecting pride and approval. The mechanic understood that this was a turning point, a moment when the impossible seemed possible, when life could thrive even in the most extraordinary circumstances. The day ahead promised further challenges, but the mechanic felt ready. Together, they had established a rhythm of care and trust, Together, they were learning to communicate, to understand, and to heal. And together, they would face whatever unbelievable events lay ahead. The morning began with a soft golden light filtering through the windows of the workshop. The young creature was already awake, its tiny body stretching with surprising energy. Its glowing eyes flickered and pulsed in bright patterns as if greeting the new day. The mechanic watched quietly, amazed at how far the creature had come in such a short time. Just days ago, it had been weak and nearly lifeless, struggling for every breath. Now it seemed curious, alert, and even playful at times. The dragon hovered outside, wings partially spread, observing everything with keen eyes. Its presence was reassuring rather than intimidating now. The mechanic had grown accustomed to its silent company, feeling that this extraordinary guardian was watching over them with a mix of concern and trust. There was a strange comfort in knowing that no matter what happened, the dragon would act if danger appeared. The mechanic began the day by preparing a light meal for the young creature, blending soft ingredients into a paste that would nourish it without causing strain. He placed the tray on the floor and the creature approached without hesitation. It seemed to understand that this food was meant to strengthen it, and it ate carefully but eagerly. The mechanic smiled quietly, noting the progress. Each small step in the creature's recovery felt monumental, and he celebrated them silently without fanfare, knowing the dragon was watching and approving. After breakfast, he decided it was time to test the creature's mobility more actively. The workshop was cleared of obstacles, and he set up a small course of soft ramps, gentle slopes, and low barriers. His aim was not to challenge it harshly, but to encourage movement, balance, and confidence. The young creature hesitated at first, stepping cautiously onto the first ramp. Its glowing eyes shifted nervously, scanning the surroundings. The mechanic knelt nearby, speaking softly, reassuring it with tone rather than words. The creature began to move forward slowly, wobbling slightly, but each step was purposeful. When it stumbled, he gently supported it, helping it regain balance without fear. This was more than physical training, it was teaching trust. The creature had to know that it could rely on him, that mistakes were part of learning, and that it was safe to try again. Each small success brightened the glow of its eyes, pulsing in harmony with the low hums of the dragon outside. As the morning passed, something incredible happened. The young creature began experimenting with its own abilities. It hopped over small obstacles on its own, stretched its limbs, and even made tiny leaps across the soft floor. The mechanic could hardly believe his eyes. It was as if it had discovered its own strength, learning to trust its body for the first time. The dragon's low, resonant hums intensified, almost like cheers. The air was thick with the sense of something miraculous unfolding. The mechanic took a moment to observe and reflect. He had learned something profound in these past days. Healing was not just about treatment or nutrition. It was about connection, patience, and understanding. The creature's progress was fueled as much by trust and reassurance as by food or care, and in that process he himself had changed. He felt a deeper sense of empathy, patience, and courage than he had ever known. By midday, the young creature began showing signs of playfulness. It would reach out to touch simple objects, batting at them gently with its tiny hands or nudging soft tools across the floor. It experimented with movement, spinning lightly or hopping in circles, its glowing eyes flickering with delight. The mechanic laughed quietly at its antics, feeling a warmth in his chest he could not describe. This was more than recovery. It was the blossoming of life, curiosity, and joy. Outside, the dragon hovered closer, its massive eyes reflecting pride and careful observation. The mechanic noticed that it sometimes tilted its head or adjusted its wings in response to the creature's movements. There was a silent, shared understanding between dragon and human, an unspoken teamwork focused entirely on the well-being of the young one. For the first time, the mechanic truly realized the depth of this bond. In the afternoon, the mechanic decided to explore another form of connection: communication. He had noticed patterns in the creature's glowing eyes and body movements. Each pulse seemed to correspond to an emotion or reaction. He began mimicking the rhythms, creating soft, deliberate tones and motions. To his amazement, the creature responded. Its glow changed in harmony with his actions, sometimes quickening, sometimes fading, like a conversation without words. The dragon added its resonant hums, completing a kind of triad of communication. This silent dialogue continued for hours. The mechanic observed carefully, making subtle changes in tone and movement, watching the creature respond. Each pulse of light, each rhythmic movement was a message. Though he could not understand every meaning, the emotions were clear: curiosity, reassurance, trust, and even joy. The human, the dragon, and the young creature had formed a small, extraordinary community united by care, patience, and mutual understanding. As the sun began to set, the mechanic prepared a gentle, nourishing meal for the creature. It approached eagerly, tasting the food with more confidence than ever before. He noticed that it now used its hands to hold the tray slightly, a small but remarkable act of independence. The dragon's low hum filled the air again, resonating through the workshop like a comforting song. The mechanic realized that this was more than progress. It was transformation. Night fell, but the energy in the workshop remained vibrant. The young creature moved more freely now, exploring the space, testing its limits, and interacting with the mechanic in subtle, meaningful ways. It was learning not just to survive, but to live fully, to explore, and to trust. The glow in its eyes pulsed with an intensity that reflected its growing confidence and vitality. The dragon, sensing the completion of another successful day, hovered silently nearby, wings tucked slightly but ready to act if necessary. Its gaze was full of approval, a silent acknowledgement of the mechanic's dedication and skill. The mechanic felt a wave of gratitude. He had faced fear, uncertainty, and the unknown, yet he had persevered. He had learned to communicate in ways beyond language, to nurture life in the most extraordinary circumstances, and to witness a miracle unfolding before his eyes. As midnight approached, the young creature settled onto the soft blankets, resting its tiny body after a day filled with movement, learning, and discovery. Its glow dimmed slightly, signaling rest, but it remained alive, alert in its own way and responsive to the mechanic's presence. He stayed close, whispering softly, ensuring comfort and warmth, ready to respond to any sudden movement or sound. The mechanic reflected on how much had changed in just a few days. When the dragon had first brought the fragile, nearly lifeless creature, he had been unsure if he could help. Now he watched as life flourished in front of him: movement, curiosity, communication, and trust. It was a moment that went beyond human understanding, a rare instance of connection between species, worlds, and hearts. By the first light of dawn, the creature had grown even stronger. Its glowing eyes were steady and bright, full of curiosity and alertness. The dragon hovered above the workshop, wings spread wide, circling slowly in a display of pride and protection. The mechanic understood that a turning point had been reached. The creature's recovery was no longer fragile or uncertain. It was thriving, growing, and beginning to understand the world in its own extraordinary way. The day ahead promised more challenges and discoveries. The mechanic knew that he would need to continue observing, guiding, and nurturing, but he also felt a deep sense of hope. Together, human, dragon, and young creature had faced the impossible and triumphed. Together, they had formed a bond of trust and understanding that would carry them through the events yet to come. As the village outside awoke, whispers of the miraculous events began to spread. People spoke in hushed tones about the extraordinary creature, the brave human who cared for it, and the massive dragon that watched over them all. Fear had given way to curiosity and awe, and within the quiet of the workshop, life pulsed brightly, a testament to courage, patience, and the power of trust. The mechanic knelt beside the young creature, brushing its tiny limbs gently and speaking softly. Its glow pulsed in response, a subtle but unmistakable signal of recognition. Outside, the dragon let out a low, harmonious hum, resonating through the walls as if joining in a silent celebration. Together, they had achieved something extraordinary, something unbelievable, something that would remain etched in memory for a lifetime. The young creature rested that night, breathing steadily and glowing warmly. The mechanic stayed vigilant as always, but allowed himself a quiet sense of accomplishment. For the first time, he realized that care and compassion, patience and trust had the power to create miracles, and he knew, deep in his heart, that the most unbelievable part of this story was still ahead. The morning light spilled gently into the workshop, touching every surface with a warm glow. The young creature stirred on the blankets, its body strong, its movements confident. The soft pulsing of its glow filled the room, brighter and steadier than ever before. The mechanic watched silently, a sense of awe washing over him. He had witnessed an incredible journey, one that began with fear, uncertainty, and fragility, and now stood at the edge of something extraordinary. The dragon hovered nearby, wings spread slightly, casting vast shadows across the walls. It had been patient, silent, and ever watchful, guiding the human without interfering, trusting that he could care for its young one. The mechanic felt a deep gratitude for this trust. He had learned that courage was not about action alone, but about consistency, attention, and compassion. And now, he realized, the moment for the final, most important test had come. The young creature began to move more boldly, exploring the workshop as if claiming it as its own. It hopped, stretched, and tested its wings slightly, small movements that hinted at the power it held within. The mechanic encouraged it softly, clapping his hands lightly and speaking in gentle tones. It responded immediately, glowing brighter, pulsing in rhythm with his voice. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the dragon dipped lower, hovering just above the ground. Its massive eyes scanned every corner, wings twitching slightly in anticipation. The air was thick with tension and excitement. The mechanic realized that both dragon and human had reached a point where the young one could finally test the limits of its strength. This was not just recovery, it was awakening, the moment when life would truly reclaim its vitality. He guided the creature to the edge of the workshop, a safe area surrounded by soft sand and gentle slopes. It paused, looking at him with glowing eyes and then at the dragon hovering above. There was a silent communication, a shared understanding that it was safe to try. The mechanic stepped back, giving it space while keeping a watchful eye. The creature crouched slightly, its tiny limbs coiled with energy, and then it leaped. The leap was awkward at first, but powerful. The creature landed safely, wobbling slightly but not falling. Its glow flared brightly, and a soft melodic sound escaped from its lips. Joy, relief, and triumph all in one. The dragon let out a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the ground and walls, a sound of pride and encouragement. The mechanic couldn't help but laugh, a sound of pure happiness. This was a moment he had never imagined he would witness in his lifetime. The young creature repeated the leap several times, each time with more confidence, more precision. It began to explore the world beyond the workshop, hopping over gentle slopes and crawling under low obstacles. Each movement showed strength, courage, and curiosity. The mechanic followed closely, supporting when necessary but allowing it freedom to discover its own capabilities. He realized that this was the ultimate lesson he could give it: independence, confidence, and trust in itself. The dragon joined in silently, lowering its massive form closer to the ground. It watched every movement with intensity, occasionally letting out soft hums that seemed like guidance. Then, in a moment that left the mechanic breathless, the dragon extended one wing slightly and demonstrated a controlled glide, hovering a few inches above the sand. The young creature's eyes widened, and instinctively it mirrored the motion, flapping tiny wings and attempting a short glide of its own. It landed safely, glowing brightly and letting out a trill of delight. The mechanic watched in disbelief and admiration. The young creature had not only recovered, it had begun to learn, to experiment, and to embrace its own potential. It was a miracle born from patience, trust, and compassion. The dragon's careful guidance and the mechanic's dedication had merged into a teaching moment, a shared success that neither species could have achieved alone. As the day continued, the creature's movements became more sophisticated. It leaped from higher surfaces, tested its balance on soft slopes, and even began to interact with small objects, nudging them, exploring their textures, and learning cause and effect. The glow in its eyes pulsed with excitement and curiosity, responding to every success. The mechanic realized that the young one was not just recovering physically, it was growing mentally and emotionally, discovering its own strength and intelligence. By late afternoon, the mechanic noticed something extraordinary. The young creature began experimenting with a combination of movement and glow. It pulsed its light in rhythmic patterns while hopping and gliding, almost like creating its own language or code. The mechanic tried to mimic the rhythm with his own hands and voice. To his amazement, the creature responded immediately, changing its pulse to match his gestures. Even the dragon joined in, adding low, resonant hums. The three of them had formed a unique form of communication, a blend of light, sound, and motion. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the workshop and the soft sand outside. The mechanic realized that this day would be remembered forever, the day the young creature embraced its strength, learned to communicate, and bonded fully with both human and dragon. It was a moment of completion, a culmination of effort, trust, and courage. The dragon descended closer to the ground, allowing the young one to approach. The creature moved carefully, placing its small hands against the dragon's scaled chest. The glow of both beings pulsed in unison, a visual harmony that radiated warmth and emotion. The mechanic watched silently, realizing that he had been part of something beyond human comprehension, a bridge between species, worlds, and hearts. The dragon lowered its massive head slightly, touching the young creature gently with its snout. The small one responded with a trill and a bright flare of light, a gesture of acknowledgement, gratitude, and connection. The mechanic felt tears prick his eyes. He had witnessed the impossible, and yet it was real. Life, trust, and courage had converged in a way that defied explanation. As night fell, the young creature curled up on the soft blankets, resting peacefully. Its glow dimmed slightly, a sign of relaxation and safety. The dragon settled nearby, wings folded protectively. The mechanic stayed close, keeping watch, but he felt a sense of completion. The impossible had been achieved. The creature had survived, recovered, learned, and bonded with both human and dragon. In the quiet of the night, the mechanic reflected on the journey. From the moment the dragon had appeared, bringing a fragile, dying young creature to his hands, everything had changed. Fear had been replaced with courage, uncertainty with trust, and fragility with strength. Every small act of care, every word, every movement had built a bridge between worlds. And in that process, he had learned that the power of compassion, patience, and courage could create miracles. The village outside remained still, unaware of the full extent of what had occurred. Yet they would sense the change in the air, the feeling that something extraordinary had happened. The mechanic knew that stories would be told for generations, of a human brave enough to care for the impossible, of a dragon that trusted beyond reason, and of a young creature that defied odds to survive and thrive. As dawn approached once more, the mechanic looked at the young creature and the dragon. The bond they had formed was unbreakable, built on trust, courage, and understanding. The creature stirred gently, glowing softly, and the dragon emitted a low, harmonious hum. The mechanic understood that the journey had not only saved a life, but had also created something extraordinary, a connection that would endure, a story of care and courage that would never be forgotten. He knelt beside the young creature one last time, brushing its limbs gently and whispering softly. Its glow pulsed in response, steady and warm. Outside, the dragon stretched its wings, gliding briefly across the sky before settling again. The mechanic felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had witnessed a miracle, guided life back from the edge, and helped create a bond that transcended fear, species, and worlds. And in that moment, he realized the truth. Sometimes, the most unbelievable things happen not through power or force, but through patience, trust, and the courage to care. That was the real miracle, the life saved, the bond formed, and the story that would live on forever. The night passed quietly, with the young creature resting safely, the dragon nearby, and the mechanic finally able to close his eyes, knowing that the impossible had been achieved. And in the hearts of all three there was a shared understanding. Life was precious, trust was powerful, and miracles could be real,